At 69, I got slapped in the face by the very boy I raised, right in front of my relatives, over dinner. He called me a burden, said I was no longer his mother, and told everyone I would be out of the house by morning. That house was everything I had after my husband died. That night, I slept at the bus station. The next morning, someone took a photo. It went viral. But that wasn't the twist. The real twist came when my sister walked into his rally and brought the bank records with her. After the slap, everything blurred for a second. The room didn't spin, not exactly, but my body forgot how to stand. I didn't fall, not completely. I gripped the edge of the dinner table with both hands and steadied myself as best I could. No one moved. The clinking of glasses stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Damien stood over me, his hand still trembling from the swing, his chest heaving like he had just won a fight. And in a way, maybe he thought he had. I didn't say a word. He stepped back and straightened his tie, then turned to the other guests. I remember his voice more than his words. Calm, rehearsed, like he had practiced the moment in the mirror. She is no longer able to live alone. She's unstable. She's been making a mess of her finances. It's no longer safe. I couldn't look up. Not yet. My cheek throbbed in silence. The dining room was full of people Damien had invited for his campaign dinner. Business leaders, journalists, extended family I hadn't seen in years. They all sat, some stunned, some sipping wine like nothing had happened. Damien gestured to a young woman standing by the entryway. I hadn't noticed her before. She wore all black, holding a leather folder against her chest. She stepped forward and placed a thick stack of papers in front of me, quietly, as if we were simply continuing dinner. Damien looked back at the crowd. These are legal documents authorizing the transition of her estate into a trust under my management. It's the responsible thing to do, and long overdue. Still, I said nothing. My face burned, not just from the blow, but from the shame. I caught the eye of one of the cousins from my late husband's side. She looked away quickly. No one else dared meet my eyes. My sister Miranda wasn't there. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. Not after the argument about the family inheritance. I thought about her in that moment, wondered what she would have done. She would have stood up. She always did. But I wasn't her. I had spent my life keeping the peace, balancing books, cleaning up other people's mistakes. When my husband died, I paid off every last bill he left behind. I worked part-time jobs to stay in the house. I never asked Damien for help. Not once. Now here he was, selling a story of my mental decline while parading me like some relic of guilt in front of his donors. Someone clapped, then another, like slow rain. A few guests nodded and raised their glasses. To progress, to legacy, I stood up. I felt my knees argue against the motion, but I didn't let them win. I didn't look at Damien. I looked straight ahead and walked out of the dining room, past the marbled hallway, through the glass doors that led out onto the driveway. No one followed. The night air hit my skin like a bucket of ice. My keys were still in my purse, hanging from my shoulder, but when I reached the car, I realized something that stopped me cold. It wasn't there. The car was gone. I turned back to the house, eyes narrowing at the shadows behind the windows. I pulled out my phone, but my fingerprint no longer unlocked it. I tried again, failed, then saw the message flash on the screen. Access disabled. Device reset. I sat down on the front step, suddenly cold in the knees, not from the air, but from something deeper. He had planned all of it. The slap was just for show. The real blow came after. I stayed there for nearly an hour, watching guests leave in groups of 2 and 3, most avoiding me. One young man offered a glance of sympathy. He didn't say anything, just looked at me like I was roadkill he didn't expect to see. Then he got in his car and left. When the last car was gone, the house lights went off. Damien didn't come out, not even to gloat. I walked. No destination, just blocks under my feet and a bag on my shoulder. Around 1 a.m., I found a bench at the bus stop near the old pharmacy. I sat down, leaned back, and felt the pain in my cheek finally catch up to my bones. A few minutes later, I heard a soft voice. "You don't look like you belong here." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A boy, maybe 17, stood in front of me holding a sandwich bag and a bottle of water. He had kind eyes and a faded hoodie. He handed me the sandwich without hesitation, then sat down beside me without asking. I didn't speak. He didn't ask for my story. He simply said, "It gets cold after 3. Try to keep moving your toes." That boy's name was Javon. I didn't know it yet, but he would be the one to lead me back to myself. If you've ever been hit by someone you love, if you've ever been thrown out of the life you built, stay with me. The next part moves fast, and it hits harder. I didn't sleep much that night, though I must have dozed off at some point, because I remember dreaming of a house with no walls, just a door frame standing in the wind. No roof, no floor. When I woke up, my head ached from the angle of the bench. My hip had gone numb. Javon was still there, curled up on the concrete near the side of the shelter, using his backpack as a pillow. The street was mostly empty, except for a sanitation truck in the distance and the usual buzz of early buses. The world was waking up, and I was still sitting where I had landed. Not just physically, but in every other sense, too. I stood, slowly. My joints reminded me that I was no longer a woman who could just sleep outside without consequences. I pressed my hand to my lower back, stretched once, then gently nudged Javon's shoulder. He stirred and looked up, eyes bleary but alert. "I'm good," he said, like it was the start of any other morning. He offered me what was left of the water. I nodded and took a sip. The sandwich from the night before sat heavy in my stomach, but it was better than nothing. He smiled once, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and walked away like he had done it 1,000 times before. I stood there for a while after he left. I didn't know where to go. The library wasn't open yet. I had no car, no keys, no phone. My bank card had been disabled sometime in the night. I knew that because I tried to buy a coffee, and the machine beeped twice, then rejected it. The woman at the counter looked at me like I was trying to steal something. I stepped aside without a word, letting the next customer move ahead. By mid-morning, the sun had crept just enough to warm the edges of my jacket. I sat down on another bench near the park and stared at nothing. Then a voice startled me. "Hey, you okay?" It wasn't Javon. It was a woman in her 30s, with a camera around her neck and a coffee in her hand. She didn't sit. She just hovered for a moment, eyes kind but hesitant. I nodded slowly, not saying anything. She smiled back, took a step away, then turned again. "Mind if I take a photo? The light's hitting just right." I didn't answer. I just turned slightly away, out of instinct more than anything. But she had already lifted the camera. 1 click. 2. And then she was gone. I didn't know her name. Still don't. But that photo would end up in a community Facebook group by lunchtime. The caption read something like, "This woman looks like someone's grandmother. I hope she's okay." By dinner, it had been shared over 1,000 times. Meanwhile, I wandered. Not far, just in loops. Neighborhoods I had driven through 100 times now looked different on foot. Colder, the houses taller, the windows more closed. It wasn't until night began to fall again that I realized how far I had walked. My feet ached in ways I hadn't felt in decades. I found another bench, this one near a closed hardware store, and sat. There was no Javon this time, just the hum of cars and the distant sound of music from someone's open apartment window. Around 9, I saw 2 patrol cars slow roll past. One of them turned and doubled back, parking half a block down. I recognized the silhouette of the officer as he stepped out. Heavy set, late 40s maybe, with a clipboard tucked under one arm. I braced myself for a warning. "A gentle move along, ma'am." But when he reached me, he tilted his head slightly and said, "Are you Rosalind Pierce?" I nodded, unsure how he knew. He smiled. "Thought so. My mother was your student, back when you worked at Jefferson Elementary. She always said you were the first adult who treated her like she mattered." He sat beside me, slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to scare me off. "Your photo's going around," he said. "A lot of folks are worried. Some think you're missing. Some think you're sick. There's a rumor your son threw you out." I didn't confirm or deny, just stared straight ahead. He didn't press. After a minute, he stood again, scribbled something on the back of a business card, and handed it to me. "If you need anything," he said, "even just a ride or a phone call. You helped my mother once. Just returning the favor." And then he left. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than just me. Damien hadn't just taken my house. He had put my dignity on display, and now strangers were watching. But what he hadn't counted on was this. I wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, Miranda called. I hadn't spoken to my sister in 15 years. Not since the fight about the old beach house in South Carolina. I expected coldness, formality. But the first words out of her mouth weren't angry. "I saw your photo," she said, "and I'm coming to get you." I hadn't heard Miranda's voice in over 15 years. Even through the static of a poor connection and whatever emotion she was holding back, I still recognized the calm control in her tone. That was always her way. No panic, no outburst, just a steady undercurrent of steel. She didn't ask what happened. She said she was coming. And then she hung up. I stood there, still holding the borrowed phone, feeling a kind of numbness I couldn't explain. After everything, I hadn't expected her. Of all people. We were never close the way some sisters are. We didn't braid each other's hair or share secrets under blankets as girls. Ours was the kind of relationship built on silent agreements and occasional truce. We fought over the family house after our mother died. I thought she sold too quickly, didn't give me time to process it. She thought I was too sentimental, clinging to bricks and shutters. Words were said. Then silence. Years of it. Now she was coming. And I didn't know how to feel. I waited near the park where we used to walk as kids, by the benches shaped like iron tulips. The wind picked up by midday, and I wrapped my jacket tighter, still wearing the same clothes from 2 days before. No makeup, no comb. Nothing on me but that wrinkled business card the officer had given me and a crushed bottle of water. When the car pulled up, I knew it was hers before the window even rolled down. The paint gleamed, black and spotless. It wasn't the kind of car you saw around here often. I stepped toward it slowly, unsure if she would get out or just wave me in like a favor being done. But Miranda opened the door. She stepped out in dark slacks and a long burgundy coat, her silver hair twisted into a low knot at the base of her neck. She looked like money, but not like she needed to prove it. And when she saw me, something cracked in her face. She didn't smile. She just reached out and wrapped her arms around me. No words. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that moment, I was no longer the woman sleeping at bus stops. I was her sister again. We drove in silence for a while. I noticed her hands on the wheel, still with no rings, no nail polish. Miranda never married. She used to joke that she didn't want to split her bank accounts with a man who couldn't read a spreadsheet. She pulled off the highway and into a private hotel property, not a chain, not something with a neon sign. This was something else. Large gates, trees trimmed within an inch of their lives. We parked behind the side building and entered through a service door. The staff greeted her like she was the owner, because she was. We took the elevator to a top-floor suite. It smelled like lemon and quiet money. The room was all cream and warm wood, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. She handed me a robe, pointed me toward the bathroom, and told me to take as long as I needed. I stood under the hot water until my fingers wrinkled. The grime of the street rinsed away easily. The ache in my chest did not. When I returned to the sitting room, she had laid out a clean set of clothes, a cup of tea, and a file folder on the table. We sat opposite each other. For a while, neither of us touched the folder. Finally, she spoke. "You taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 11. Do you remember that? You used your old payroll slips from the school and made me check the numbers." I nodded slowly. "You said, 'Numbers never lie, but people do.'" She pushed the folder toward me. Inside were copies of banking records, legal filings, and something that made my hands go cold. A notarized document with Damien's forged signature. It was dated 2 years earlier and claimed I had transferred power of attorney to him. I stared at it for a long time. My name was there, my supposed signature, even the notary's seal. Miranda watched me closely. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. "I have a contact at the registry office." She flagged the document. "Damien filed it 6 weeks ago, right before the fundraiser." I swallowed hard, the pieces locking into place. He didn't just throw me out. He planned it, long before the slap, long before the guests. That entire night was a performance. Miranda tapped another sheet. "This is the withdrawal. $280,000 from your retirement account, 3 days after the document was filed." I couldn't speak. I just kept looking down. But Miranda wasn't done. She reached under the table and pulled out a separate folder. This one was thinner. I opened it. It was the Serenity House paperwork. Signed, sealed, and notarized. My name was on it. 3 years ago, I had sat in this same suite, convinced by Miranda to transfer my house and remaining assets into a trust. I had done it for security, in case I got sick, in case I forgot things. But then I had told myself I didn't need it. I had tucked the paperwork away and gone back to my quiet routines. I hadn't thought about it since. Until now. Your house, your savings, everything. "It's not in your name anymore," she said quietly. "It's under the trust, protected, which means what Damien did was theft, not from you, from an entity, a non-profit." Miranda leaned back, letting that sink in. He didn't just try to steal from his mother. He stole from a registered legal body. That's fraud. She handed me one last paper. It was blank, except for a time and a location. Public hearing, 2 days from now. Damien would be speaking on community trust, senior safety, and protecting the vulnerable. Miranda smiled, just slightly. "I think we should attend. Together." And for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet rumble of something returning. Not vengeance, not rage. Control. 2 days later, I sat in the back seat of Miranda's car, staring out at the town hall as we pulled up to the side entrance. The sun was sharp against the glass windows, catching every fingerprint and smudge. A long banner hung over the double doors, printed in bold blue letters. Community matters. Safety and trust in local leadership. Damien's campaign colours. Miranda parked behind the building just out of view from the main entrance. She turned the engine off and handed me a folder. Inside were all the copies. The bank withdrawal. The forged power of attorney. The Serenity House trust deed. Clean, organized, undeniable. I held the folder in my lap and kept my hands still. Miranda looked at me, her voice level. "You're not here to make noise. You're here to be the calm storm they never saw coming." I nodded. We entered through a side hallway, guided by a volunteer who recognized Miranda instantly. She introduced herself as Lacey, said she used to work at one of Miranda's hotels in Houston. Lacey led us to the front row, far left. A reserved sign with Miranda's last name taped to the seat. The room was a modern auditorium, rows of chairs on sloped floors, a podium at the center under bright lights. Local reporters with shoulder-mounted cameras and phones filled the side aisles. There were maybe 200 people in the room, from business owners to students in college sweatshirts. Everyone dressed for the occasion. I sat in silence while the speaker before Damien wrapped up her notes. She gave some vague remarks about small-town values and community investment. No one really clapped. Everyone was waiting for him. Then he stepped up to the podium. Damien wore a grey suit, no tie, with an open collar. His hair was swept back like always. He smiled with the ease of someone who knew how to hold a room. The crowd leaned forward, phones lifted. He began his speech with a story. Of course he did. He told them about his mother, about me, about how hard I had worked all my life, about how he had taken responsibility for my care in my later years. He used words like sacrifice, honor, tradition. He painted a picture of a devoted son doing the right thing. I sat still, hands folded, letting him speak. Then he pivoted, as expected, into policy. His new plan for senior safety, for preventing fraud and abuse, his promise to protect the vulnerable. The irony of it burned at the edges of my tongue. Miranda gave a small nod, and then she stood. She didn't walk to the stage, she walked to the media section, where 2 local reporters were taking notes. She leaned down and whispered something. Both of them looked up, then quickly followed her toward the side exit. I stood next. I walked straight to the center aisle, and then toward the stage. Not fast, not slow. I didn't make eye contact with Damien. I didn't need to. The room murmured. A few people turned their heads. One woman gasped softly. I stepped onto the platform just as Damien finished a sentence about how families were the backbone of strong communities. He turned to see me and froze for less than a second. Just enough. I took the microphone from the side stand and turned toward the audience. My name is Rosalind Pierce. Some of you may know me. I used to work at the elementary school on Jefferson Street. I also used to be this man's mother. The room fell silent. I am here today not for revenge, but for truth. I opened the folder, held up the forged document. This is what he used to take my home. This is how he emptied my retirement account. This is the same document he filed with the court to prove I was incompetent. There were murmurs. Someone in the third row stood up and began recording. I held up the second paper. This is the trust, dated 3 years ago. Serenity House, a non-profit I created with the help of my sister to protect my assets if anything happened to me. This man didn't steal from a parent. He stole from a registered charitable trust. Gasps. Audible now. Miranda reappeared with both reporters, handing them hard copies of the documents. I looked directly at Damien. And now, he stands here and tells you he wants to protect the vulnerable. I stepped back, said nothing else. The room turned, not slowly, immediately. Reporters pushed toward the front, phones raised, questions were shouted, but I didn't answer. Damien stood still, one hand on the podium, his eyes locked on mine. A minute later, a familiar figure moved through the crowd. Officer Lopez, the same man who had found me at the bench. He walked up the steps calmly, spoke quietly to Damien. Damien stepped back, lifted both hands slightly, then nodded. Lopez turned toward me, his voice low, private. "You want to press charges now or later?" I whispered back. "Let's begin now." He nodded once, turned. Damien's hands were cuffed without resistance. A few people in the audience clapped, most just watched in stunned silence. As he was led down the aisle, the banner over the doorway flapped once in the breeze from the opening doors. Community Matters. I stood there, still holding the folder, watching my son disappear into the hallway under the weight of a truth he thought he could outrun. But he didn't know who I was. Not really. And now the town did. The hearing ended the way most public scandals do. No formal announcement, no loud conclusion, just confusion, murmurs, and people avoiding eye contact on the way out. Damien was escorted through a side hallway by Officer Lopez and another deputy. I stayed on stage for a moment longer, letting the sound settle around me. Then I stepped down and walked past the rows of half-filled chairs, past the reporters still flipping through their copies, and out the same way I had entered. Miranda was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything until we were back in the car. He never saw it coming. I didn't answer. My hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear, something colder, something quieter. We drove back to her hotel. She asked if I wanted anything to eat. I said no. I sat by the window while she poured a glass of water and checked her phone. Calls were coming in already. She had turned off all alerts except mine. After a while, she sat across from me. "You need to know what's coming." I nodded. She opened her laptop and showed me the local news feed. Damien's arrest had made the front page. 2 headlines rotated through the home screen. One focused on the fraud charges. The other ran a still image from the moment I stood on stage with the microphone in my hand and the folder open. Public perception was shifting. Fast. Miranda had already hired legal counsel. A team, not a single person. Not just for me, for the trust, for Serenity House. Damien hadn't just embarrassed himself. He had triggered a chain reaction with real consequences. A formal investigation was already underway. The county district attorney's office would be reviewing financial records, campaign filings, and any other documentation linked to Damien's public and private funds. Because the trust was registered as a charitable organization, any attempt to access it under false pretenses automatically triggered felony review. That meant Damien wasn't facing a slap on the wrist. He was facing federal charges. Miranda explained all of it cleanly, efficiently, like a briefing. I listened but couldn't hold on to all the terms. What stuck with me was the weight behind her words. This wasn't about a son misbehaving. This was about theft, fraud, and the manipulation of public trust. And it wasn't just Damien. Others might fall with him. His campaign manager, the legal aide who notarized the fake documents, possibly even someone in the clerk's office who let things slip through unchecked. Miranda didn't gloat. She was too smart for that. But there was something final in her tone, like a woman closing a chapter with no plans to revisit it. I spent most of the afternoon in silence, watching the city move beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Damien was sitting in a small cell with white walls and questions he couldn't answer. I wondered if he felt any of what I had felt that night at the bus stop. The shame, the cold, the stillness between each heartbeat when you realize no one is coming to help you. But I didn't want revenge. Not anymore. I wanted truth. And I wanted distance. That evening, Officer Lopez stopped by the hotel. Miranda had called him earlier to debrief. He brought a brown envelope with preliminary documentation from the county. I signed a few things, initialed others. He looked tired. He was still in uniform, but had undone the top button of his collar. He said Damien had been processed without incident. No bail hearing yet. He was being held overnight pending further review. Charges would be formalized the next day. He paused before leaving. You know, when I was 10, you pulled me aside after school and taught me how to balance my lunch account. My parents were always behind on payments. You didn't scold me. You just taught me how to check the numbers. I remembered that. Vaguely. His name had rung a distant bell. Lopez smiled faintly. You didn't just help me once. You helped a lot of us. It's only fair someone showed up for you. After he left, Miranda and I sat in silence again. She poured 2 glasses of wine. We drank slowly. The next morning, I woke early. The light through the curtains was soft, the kind that makes you believe things might be okay again. I dressed and went down to the lobby. No makeup, just my face as it was. A young woman from the front desk handed me a newspaper. Printed, folded, the old-fashioned kind. I thanked her and sat near the window. The photo on the front page was mine. Not the one from the rally, a different one. The bus bench. My head turned slightly, eyes closed, holding onto my coat as if it were the last thing I owned. I studied it for a long time, not because I looked pitiful, but because I didn't anymore. Miranda came down a few minutes later. She saw the paper and raised an eyebrow. They'll keep calling, she said. Reporters, community leaders, probably even our old cousins. I'm not answering anyone right now. Good, she said. That's what lawyers are for. By the end of the day, we had received 3 letters from organizations requesting to formally partner with Serenity House. One of them included a proposal for expansion into nearby counties. Another offered to match donations up to $50,000. I didn't expect it. Not any of it. Miranda handled most of the communication. She protected my time like it was something valuable. And I suppose now it was. That night, I sat alone in the suite. She had gone to a meeting across town. I stayed behind. I stood by the window again, looked out at the city below. I thought about everything I had lost. Not just the house, not just the money, the version of family I had carried inside me for so long, the image of motherhood that I had let define me. Damien had taken it. Or maybe I had let it go long ago and only now realized it was gone. Either way, it was no longer mine. But something else had taken root, control, and the calm that comes with it. And sometimes, that is enough. By the end of that week, the press had moved on. The headline on Damien's arrest had slipped down to the 2nd row on the local paper's website. A different scandal had taken its place. Something about a zoning dispute and a city contractor. That was the nature of these things. They made noise for 3 days, maybe 5 if the pictures were good. Then the noise shifted. But inside my body, the echo had not settled. The silence after the rally was not peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, where the damage starts to show. Some trees still stood, but their roots were loose. Some windows stayed intact, but the frames had cracked. Damien had requested a visit. I thought about declining. Miranda encouraged me to ignore it. She had already moved on to logistics, bank paperwork, asset freezes, the formal appointment of new board members for Serenity House. She had no time for sentiment, and I appreciated that about her. But this was not about forgiveness or confrontation. It was about closing a door that should have been shut long ago. So I said yes. The detention center sat just off the freeway, behind a row of grey buildings that looked like offices from a distance. It had no barbed wire, no towering fences, just low concrete walls and small windows with thick glass. It looked quiet, like a place where paperwork lived. A woman at the front desk handed me a clipboard and asked for ID. I gave it to her without speaking. After a few minutes, a guard waved me through a metal detector and into a hallway lined with dull green walls. The air smelled like floor wax and old plastic. We entered a room with a long table in the middle, chairs on both sides. No divider, no glass wall, just space. Damien was already seated. He looked thinner. His suit had been replaced with a beige uniform, no name tag, just numbers printed over the chest pocket. His hair had grown in awkwardly, dark roots pressing through the bleach he had worn during the campaign. His hands were folded on the table. He didn't look up when I entered. I sat across from him. No greeting. The silence stretched between us for nearly a full minute. Then he spoke. "You got everything you wanted." I looked at him, then away. "What I wanted," I said, "was never this." He laughed once, not bitterly, just tired. Then what was it? What I wanted was to keep my home, to be respected, to be seen as something more than an obstacle in your way. He leaned back. The chair creaked. "You could have just said no." "I did, and you didn't listen." Another silence. Damien rubbed his jaw with one hand, slow and distracted. "Do you think people will ever forget?" "I don't know." He looked down again. "The thing is, I thought I had time. I thought I could fix it before it caught up to me. I didn't expect you to fight back." That part struck me. I didn't expect you to fight back. It was a confession, not about crime or guilt, but about how he saw me. He had counted on my silence, my stillness, my habit of letting things go. He had built his plan on the foundation of a mother who wouldn't push back. And for a long time, he was right. I stood up. "You will be sentenced. You'll serve time. And when you get out, I won't be waiting." He flinched. A small movement, nothing dramatic. But I saw it. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the frame. "When you were 10, I stayed up all night to sew a badge on your Boy Scout uniform because you lost it the day before the ceremony. You never thanked me. I didn't need it. But I remember." He didn't respond. I stepped out and didn't look back. Outside, the sun had risen fully, bright against the pavement. Miranda was waiting in the car. She didn't ask how it went, just started the engine and turned the air conditioning low. We drove back without speaking. That afternoon, I sat with Thomas Deacon, the attorney who had helped Miranda with the trust formation. He was tall, quiet, with a slow way of speaking that made you pay attention. We went through the trust files one by one, reviewing what needed to be updated, what needed to be sealed. "You'll need to designate a successor," he said, "someone to manage it if you can't." I wrote Javon's name. Thomas paused for a moment. "He's young?" "Yes, and he's earned it." Thomas nodded. No argument. We finished the paperwork. He left with a promise to return next week. That evening, I walked through the hotel grounds alone. Miranda had gone to a board meeting. The sky was pink and stretched wide. Somewhere in the garden, I saw a woman about my age holding the hand of her granddaughter. The girl pointed at a butterfly. The woman smiled, knelt, and watched it land. I kept walking. Inside my room, I turned on the lamp, sat at the desk, and opened my notebook. The same one I had carried for years. The one with budgeting notes, grocery lists, and the names of students I used to help after class. On the first blank page, I wrote 4 words. I am not small, and I closed it. For now. The morning after my visit with Damien, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was printed on heavy cream paper, unmarked on the outside, folded neatly. I picked it up from the carpet and carried it to the desk, opened it carefully with the side of my fingernail. The letterhead was from Fairbridge and Wintham LLP, a name I recognized only vaguely, one of those boutique firms Damien used to name-drop when bragging about future campaigns. But the content wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to me. My name, full and spelled correctly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was something far stranger. A warning. The letter stated in clipped legal language that someone from inside Damien's former campaign had submitted documents under my name. At first, they had assumed I was part of the request. Now, with his arrest and the scrutiny that followed, they were flagging the file. For liability, for due diligence. They wanted to speak to me. On the record. Miranda read the letter after I did. Her jaw tensed. Then she reached for her phone and called Thomas. By that afternoon, we were in a conference room on the 26th floor of a high-rise across from City Hall. The walls were all glass, the kind that made you feel exposed even when you weren't. Thomas brought in a second lawyer from the fraud division. She was younger, sharper, eyes like a hawk in daylight. She introduced herself as Lena Chu and didn't waste time on pleasantries. We sat, and she laid out the facts. Damien hadn't just used my name to withdraw funds from his campaign account. He had opened an entirely separate account at a private credit union across the state. The account was listed under a fake non-profit, registered as Community Heritage Trust. The authorized signatory on the documents was me, my forged signature. Matching handwriting, matching ID number, matching birth date. The bank had already frozen the account. Lena showed me the scanned forms. My stomach turned. It was my name, my birthday, my old address. But none of it was mine. Thomas leaned in and explained the legal significance. Forgery, wire fraud, identity theft. With the current investigation expanding, this was not just fuel for prosecution, it was proof of intent. Premeditation. He did all this with your name as the shield, Lena said, because who would question a retired school treasurer? Miranda's face was stone. I asked how much was in the account. They hesitated. Then Lena said it. Over $400,000. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because of the money, but because of the audacity. Damien hadn't just betrayed me. He had built an entire infrastructure of lies using the pieces of my past, my job, my credentials, my story. He used me not just to steal, but to appear legitimate while doing it. Lena pushed forward a folder. I want to file an affidavit, she said. We need you on the record. Your signature. Your voice. I took the pen and signed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ending the noise. Back at the hotel, I sat by the window again. The city outside had turned orange with late afternoon. People moved like they always did. Fast, distracted, unaware of the small wars others were fighting behind closed doors. Miranda walked in quietly. She poured 2 glasses of wine. Neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually, she sat down across from me. You still think he was ever going to stop? No. Good. Then we go all the way. That evening, while she took a call with the legal team, I opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write anything. I just flipped through the old pages. The grocery lists, the budgeting reminders, the handwritten tips I had written for myself on how to stretch a paycheck across 2 weeks without dipping into savings. I remembered every tight year, every skipped vacation, every quiet morning when I left the house before the sun came up, so I could open the school office and start brewing coffee for the janitors. And I remembered why I had done all of it, not just for survival, not just for peace, but because I believed that discipline, that quiet goodness, would matter. And then came a boy named Damien. He wasn't born from me, but I raised him with that same belief, that same hope, and he had used it, used me. I set the notebook down and stood. That night, I asked Miranda to make one call. To the press. Not the tabloids, not the local station. I wanted to speak. On camera. Once. Clearly. The next morning, we scheduled the interview. It would be recorded in a quiet studio across town, under soft lighting, no audience, no music, no editing. Just a chair. A mic. And me. I didn't want to defend myself. I wanted to define myself. The woman who used to balance budgets in the shadows of the school cafeteria. The woman who cooked Thanksgiving dinner 3 years in a row and never got a thank you. The woman who saved every pay stub, every receipt, every broken promise, and lived long enough to turn them into evidence. I wore a plain grey sweater, no makeup, just lip balm. And I spoke, clearly, slowly, for 23 minutes. When it was over, the producer took off my mic and said softly that her own mother would have cried hearing this. But I didn't cry. Not then. I had already done that. I walked out of the studio into the cold light of the street, buttoned my coat, and kept walking. The city didn't stop for me, but I no longer needed it to. The studio interview aired on a Tuesday evening, slotted quietly after a segment about local housing policies. No fanfare, no trailer, just a soft open and a headline on the lower third of the screen that read, Rosalind Pierce, A Mother's Quiet Reckoning. Miranda and I watched from the suite, volume low, lights dimmed. The camera didn't flatter me. It didn't need to. What mattered was the truth. And the truth didn't need angles or edits. Within 24 hours, the story spread. Not because I asked it to, because it hit a nerve. Former students began commenting. School staff I hadn't seen in over a decade tagged each other and shared it. Journalists clipped quotes and posted them on independent blogs. Then came the civic forums, then the national headlines. What started as a personal reckoning became something public. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about exposure. About the quiet, older women who had been left behind, mocked, stripped of dignity, not just by one man, but by an entire system that enabled men like him. But I wasn't chasing that attention. I just wanted peace. 2 mornings later, I received a letter from the county court. The state prosecutor was moving forward with additional charges against Damien, now bolstered by evidence from the forged non-profit account, campaign finance violations, and identity theft. There was also a new motion from the State Ethics Committee. He would be barred from holding any political or administrative office for life. That part made Miranda raise an eyebrow. They don't often use language that final, she said. I nodded. It was final because it needed to be. Later that week, Miranda and I sat with Thomas again. We weren't meeting to review the trust. We were building something new. A fund, not a charity, not a vague awareness campaign. We were building a structured initiative for women over 60 who had been financially exploited by their children or relatives. The system had no clean name for that kind of abuse, but it was real, and it was growing. We called it the Quiet Fund. Miranda insisted on fronting the first 5 million herself. I contributed every cent from the lawsuit settlement the state was preparing against Damien. I didn't want the money, I wanted it used. We created tiers of support: housing relocation, legal aid, counseling, emergency protection services. Miranda's team drafted the infrastructure. Thomas's people verified legal compliance. We weren't just writing checks, we were creating shelter and a voice. I signed every page without hesitation. That same afternoon, I asked to walk the perimeter of the new women's housing site that Miranda had bought under a different name. The building was an old hospital repurposed into private apartments. Not glamorous, but clean, safe, quiet. There was a courtyard with benches under shade trees, and one of the project leaders had planted lavender in the front beds. As we passed a row of small units, I saw an older woman sitting on a folding chair, her hands resting on her lap. She looked up at me, not with curiosity, but with recognition, like we had walked the same road, like she had heard my voice from the screen, and now saw it attached to a living person. I gave a small nod. She returned it. Nothing more. Nothing less. Inside the admin office, I found a small corkboard filled with thank you notes, drawings from grandchildren, and a clipped headline from my interview. Someone had written, "She showed us how," in blue marker across the paper. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. On the ride back, Miranda asked how I felt. I said lighter, not healed, but no longer sinking. That night I stood by the window in our suite, watching the traffic roll by. I thought of every mother I'd known through the years who'd been pushed to the margins, women who raised generations with hands that never stopped working, who saved, who stayed, who were told again and again that their quiet was weakness. But silence was never weakness. It was waiting. That week, letters arrived from other women, some handwritten, some typed, some barely legible, their ink smudged by tears or age or nerves. They told stories of eviction, humiliation, of sons who signed deeds behind their backs, of daughters who called them useless, of courts that ruled in favor of younger voices with more polish. And one phrase kept appearing. I thought I was alone. I responded to every letter I could, sometimes with a full note, sometimes just one line. You are not invisible. By the end of the month, Miranda's publicist reported that media outlets had started referring to me as the reluctant whistleblower. A strange title. But not wrong. I had not asked to become a symbol, but I would carry it, if it meant others were seen. One evening, as we walked through the new garden behind the site, Miranda asked me whether I missed the old house, the one Damien had forced me out of. I thought for a long moment. I miss the window in the kitchen. I miss the light in the afternoons. Then I paused. But I don't miss who I had to be in that house. She understood. Some houses become cages, and some departures become doors. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. This time, a full page. It was not a plan, not a list, not a speech. It was a vow. I would never again let anyone define my worth by their ambition, and I would never again stay silent out of politeness when dignity was on the line. The world might forget us, but we don't forget ourselves. And in the quiet, we rise. 3 weeks after the launch of the Quiet Fund, Miranda's assistant forwarded a formal invitation to a local event. It was a city-sponsored gala honoring community service and philanthropy. The invite listed speakers, awards, musical guests. Near the bottom of the program was Damien's name, scheduled as a legacy speaker for his contributions to economic development and youth outreach. I read the line 3 times. The audacity felt surgical. He was facing criminal charges, had been banned from public office, yet still clawed at relevance through local favour and spin. Miranda looked at me across the table. "You already know what I'm thinking," I said. She gave me a single nod. We would go. I did not want a scene. I wanted a reckoning. That Friday evening, I wore a plain black suit and pinned a silver brooch to my lapel. It had belonged to my husband. Miranda wore a navy dress, understated, but cut with the authority of someone used to being listened to. Thomas came too, dressed sharp in charcoal grey, holding his briefcase like a silent promise. We arrived 15 minutes before the program began. The room was elegant but restrained, with white draped tables, soft jazz, and careful lighting. Nothing excessive, just tasteful enough to imply importance. I took a seat near the middle aisle. Miranda took one beside me. Thomas stayed near the side entrance. From the corner of my eye, I saw Damien walk in, flanked by 2 donors and a local business owner who had publicly defended him weeks earlier. He looked thinner. His smile stretched wider than usual, but his shoulders tensed every time a camera turned. He hadn't seen me yet. The program began with routine acknowledgements, a few city council updates, a brief performance by a local youth choir. The audience clapped politely, wine glasses chiming softly against porcelain. It all felt so distant from the weeks I had spent on sidewalks, in courtrooms, behind closed doors full of denial and silence. Then, his name was called. Damien stood and adjusted his blazer. He walked to the podium slowly, smiling at each table like a politician trained to mirror warmth. The applause was steady, if restrained. He tapped the microphone once and began. His voice was smooth, measured. He opened with a quote from his high school principal, spoke of service, of resilience, of his own mother, who he claimed taught him everything about sacrifice. Miranda looked down at her program, face unreadable. I sat still, my palms flat against the tablecloth, my breathing steady. Then he pivoted. He spoke of the Quiet Fund, congratulating the women who had used their stories to inspire and remind us of our duty to the elders of our community. He smiled, looked directly at my table. There it was, his spin, his reach, trying to reframe my existence as part of his redemption. That was the moment I stood. I didn't say a word. I walked toward the side of the room where a woman from the local press stood filming with a discreet camera. She noticed me and stepped back slightly. Thomas handed her a folder. Inside were documents, financial statements, 2 signed affidavits, and 1 short statement. She opened it. Her eyes widened slightly. Then I turned and stepped back into the light. Not onto the stage, just close enough that the front row could see me. A murmur passed across the tables. Damien's voice cracked slightly as he tried to continue. And then the camera lights shifted. The live stream for the local press station adjusted, cutting to me, then back to him. They recognized the name, the story, the face. He stumbled over his next line. Then someone in the back stood and walked out. Then another. The room was no longer silent. Whispers built like rising steam. Thomas walked over to the event moderator, whispered something, and handed over a short printed press release from our legal team. The moderator nodded. The document was placed into a manila envelope and handed to the event organizer. Then the screen behind the podium blinked. For a brief second, Damien's campaign logo flashed, then a still image of a bank transfer appeared. Over his voice, the room heard audio of a wiretap excerpt that had been released earlier that week, his voice confirming that the funds were safe in my mother's name, she won't fight it. The silence that followed was not the quiet of formality. It was the quiet of a room breaking. He paused, then lowered the microphone. and walked off the stage. I did not smile. There was no need. I turned and walked back to my seat. Miranda reached over and placed her hand on mine. Not tight, just steady. The MC returned to the stage, voice slightly shaky, and announced an early intermission. The crowd dispersed. Some muttered apologies, others avoided eye contact. A few came over to say they had followed the story, that they were sorry. I nodded each time, not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. The truth, once named, demanded no justification. Before we left, Thomas told me the media outlet had just pushed a story live with documents attached. A second outlet requested a follow-up interview. Miranda declined on my behalf. No more cameras, not yet. We walked into the parking lot under a quiet sky. I looked up. No stars, but there was a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. As we approached the car, I paused. Not because of the cold, but because I saw him. Damien stood by the rear of the building, his blazer in hand, sweat on his brow despite the chill. He looked at me, not angry, not proud, just emptied. We locked eyes for a second, and in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect. Pity, not for the man he was, but for the boy I once held, who could have chosen better. I said nothing. I got in the car and closed the door. The morning after the gala, the phone calls started at 6:15 a.m. Most were reporters, eager to get a comment on the public fallout. A few were former campaign donors, their voices tight with disbelief, hunting for someone to blame. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't going to spend another day answering for a man who had never once taken responsibility. Instead, I sat by the kitchen window in Miranda's home, wrapped in one of her soft cardigans. Outside, the palm trees barely moved. The world somehow felt too still for everything that had just exploded. I kept thinking about the way Damien had looked in the alley behind the building. There had been nothing in his eyes, not rage, not even shame, just absence. And I wondered if that was the final cost of his choices, if he had emptied himself of everything except ambition, and now that it was gone, there was simply nothing left. Thomas arrived shortly after 8, carrying a manila envelope and a black thermos. He handed me the coffee first. "You'll want to hear this sitting down," he said. Miranda joined us at the dining table. Thomas opened the envelope and began laying out documents one by one. The first was a formal letter from the State Ethics Commission. They had launched a full-scale inquiry into Damien's past 3 campaigns. The wire transfers under my name had triggered a deeper audit, which revealed irregularities stretching back over 5 years. Then came the freeze orders from 3 different financial institutions. All accounts tied to Damien were being locked pending review. Thomas explained that they had also subpoenaed 3 of his close associates. One had already turned over emails that confirmed knowledge of the misuse of my identity. Another was seeking immunity. I listened quietly, watching the sunlight inch across the floor. Miranda scribbled notes. She was already thinking several steps ahead, I could tell. Next came the eviction notice. The house Damien had thrown me out of, the one he had declared his, was officially under lien. Between unpaid back taxes, campaign debts, and the fraudulent withdrawals from my name, he was nearly $700,000 underwater. The court had ruled that the property was to be seized within 30 days unless full restitution was made. I didn't react at first. Then I spoke, calmly. "Let it go." Miranda looked up. So did Thomas. "I'm not interested in taking it back. That place is haunted now, not by ghosts, but by who he chose to become in it. Let the court sell it. Let it go to strangers." It's no longer mine in any way that matters. Thomas nodded once. He understood. Miranda tapped her pen twice against her notepad, and then she asked something unexpected. Would you like to return to where it all started? I looked at her. She meant our old hometown, the small coastal city where we had grown up, before marriages and careers and all the miles between us. Why now? I asked. Because everything broke there, Miranda said. But maybe it's also where something new can begin. 2 days later, we packed a weekend bag and took her car north along the highway. The town was both exactly as I remembered it and completely changed. The bakery on Main Street had been replaced by a boutique yoga studio. The public library was still there, though it now shared space with a co-working centre. But the scent of sea salt, the curve of the boardwalk, the tiny bridge near the elementary school, those were the same. Miranda took me to the church where our parents used to volunteer. The garden out back still bloomed with low white roses and lavender. We sat on the old stone bench, saying little. Then she pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I had this drawn up for you, she said, but only if you want it. It was a deed, not to another mansion, not to a penthouse, but to a modest house a few blocks from the beach. 3 bedrooms, 1 level, quiet, safe. I blinked slowly. Why would you do this? Because you gave your life making sure everyone else stayed afloat, and I watched you get punished for it. Now it's time someone gave you something with no strings, no debts, and no illusions. I took the paper, held it in my lap. I didn't cry. I simply exhaled, and the weight that left my chest made me dizzy. That night, I stood on the tiny back porch of the new house. The lights were dim. The floorboards creaked like they remembered laughter. I could hear the waves in the distance. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then silence. Inside, the rooms were unfurnished, bare, but they were mine. I placed the deed in a drawer and sat on the floor with a blanket Miranda had brought. No portraits on the walls, no trophies, no memories etched in corners, just space. And in that emptiness, something strange bloomed. Not joy exactly, but room for it. I had spent so long reacting to what others had taken from me. This was the first time I had something new that no one had the power to take. I had made peace with what Damien had become. That didn't mean I forgave him. It meant I refused to carry him with me into whatever came next. The past was loud. This house was quiet. And I was ready to live in that silence. The first letter came from the state's Attorney General office. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, postmarked from the capital, delivered by hand. The envelope was thick, its weight disproportionate to its size, but I knew what it meant the moment I saw it. Thomas had warned me this might happen. The timeline, however, had moved faster than expected. I sat on the porch with my coffee and opened it with calm fingers. The words inside were formal and precise. Damien Pierce was being officially indicted on 6 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of campaign finance violations, and 1 count of obstruction. The document listed my name in 4 of those charges as the injured party. But what struck me most was how sterile it all felt. My name had been used, my money stolen, my dignity dragged through mud, and now it was being processed into legal language like it was another line item in a spreadsheet. Still, there was satisfaction in knowing justice had started moving. The next day, Miranda forwarded me the official court date. The case was scheduled for the following month. It wouldn't be a quick trial. The prosecution had already called a list of witnesses, including 2 former staffers, a financial advisor, and even a retired district treasurer who had caught Damien's campaign filing anomalies years earlier but had been ignored. I would be asked to testify too. That part made my stomach twist. Not because I was afraid of speaking in public. I had stood before crowds before, back when I was school treasurer and ran community meetings. But this time, the crowd wouldn't be kind. They would be reporters, curious faces, maybe even some of Damien's remaining supporters. And every word I said would be used to frame not just him, but the version of myself I had chosen to protect all those years. Still, I agreed. I wasn't doing it to punish him. I was doing it to release myself. The week before the court hearing, Thomas and Miranda both flew in. Miranda stayed at my new house, taking the guest room, filling the air with her usual energy. She stocked the fridge, ironed my clothes, and pestered me to sit still for her hairstylist friend who had come along for the ride. Thomas stayed at a hotel nearby. He came over each morning with new papers to sign, new logistics to sort. I appreciated his quiet focus. It kept me grounded. We rehearsed my statement 3 times, each version shorter, cleaner, stronger. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't rage. I would tell the truth. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in a dark grey suit Miranda had picked out for me. I tied a silk scarf around my neck, pale lavender. It was the same colour I used to wear to faculty meetings back in the day. A small detail, but it reminded me who I had been before all of this. The courthouse was already buzzing when we arrived. Camera crews lined the walkway. Miranda walked in with me, her hand lightly on my arm. Thomas led us through a side entrance, away from the crowd. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected, both in temperature and feeling. The wood panelling was polished, the flags stiff with formality. And then I saw him. Damien sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 lawyers. He looked thinner. His suit hung off his frame like it belonged to someone else. His face was unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might look at me, acknowledge me, anything. But his eyes stayed forward, fixed on the bench. The judge entered, and the room snapped into silence. I was the second witness called. I rose when summoned, stepped into the box, and raised my hand to swear the oath. Then I began. I spoke of how I had raised Damien, taken him in when his birth parents had abandoned him. How I had put aside part of every paycheck for his future. I talked about the accounts, the letters I received from the bank, the moment I realized he had forged my name to take money from a trust I had never told him about. I told them how I was thrown out of my home, how I slept outside that night. The room didn't move. No coughing, no shuffling, just breath held tight. Then I told them why I was there. Not to destroy a man who had already undone himself, but to reclaim the parts of me he had tried to erase. When I stepped down, I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The prosecution moved swiftly after that. They had the documents, the audio recordings, the bank ledgers. Damien's defense team tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a campaign caught in administrative chaos. But the weight of evidence was clear. At the end of the day, the judge ruled he would be held until sentencing. Bail was denied due to flight risk and the financial magnitude of the fraud. As the room emptied, Damien was led out in cuffs. His eyes did flick toward me then, just once. And what I saw was not hate or regret. It was something worse. Nothing. A hollow man walking toward consequences he thought he'd never face. Miranda and I walked out the back exit again, past the press, past the cameras. I didn't say much in the car, neither did she. But as we pulled into the driveway of my small house, she reached over and turned off the engine. She looked at me and smiled. "He's not your burden anymore." And I believed her. Finally. The air outside had shifted. Spring came early that year, and for the first time in a long time, I could smell new things blooming. It had rained the night before. The sidewalk was still damp. A few petals from Miranda's rose bushes had scattered across the front yard, soft and careless in their fall. I stood at the porch railing and let the light settle over me. Not everything was fixed, but it no longer had to be. 2 weeks had passed since the courtroom closed its doors behind Damien. He hadn't spoken a word to me. No call, no letter, no apology. But I didn't need it, not anymore. The media coverage had quieted. For a while I couldn't step into a grocery store without someone stopping me. Some wanted to praise me. Others offered sympathy. And a few, those who had supported Damien publicly, simply averted their eyes. That didn't bother me either. They had believed the version of him he built. I had lived with the real one. The house I lived in now wasn't as large or as fancy as the one I had lost, but it was mine in a deeper way. It was Miranda's gift, yes, but it was built with something she knew I had earned long before money ever entered the equation: dignity and peace. I started my mornings with coffee, a real breakfast, and a short walk down the road. Some days I passed a little girl and her mother waiting for the school bus. The girl reminded me of Damien when he was small: soft eyes, curious hands. I always waved. Other mornings I went to the community centre, not to volunteer, not yet, just to be. To sit in a room where nobody knew my name or my story, and simply breathe without explaining myself. One Thursday afternoon, Miranda and I took a trip up the coast. She insisted on renting a convertible. I laughed at her, said we'd look ridiculous. She said we already were ridiculous, so we might as well enjoy it. The sun lit her hair silver. She drove like a teenager, fast and loud and free. We stopped at a small cliffside inn for lunch. The view overlooked the sea, all wide sky and open water. I told her that I had always wanted to live by the ocean. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Then do it." I almost believed her. I almost said yes. But my heart wasn't chasing anything anymore. That night, I sat in the back garden alone. The wind carried the smell of rosemary and warm soil. I thought of all that had been broken: the home I lost, the money that would never return, the trust that had shattered in a single moment of violence at that dinner table. But I also thought of what survived. The parts of me Damien couldn't touch. He could drain bank accounts. He could forge signatures. He could even raise a hand against me. But he could never erase my silence that followed. The quiet I chose, the control I took back by not shouting, by not spiraling, by standing up not just in court, but in front of my own reflection, every morning after. Damien would serve time. Years, likely. The state had already frozen his assets. His career in politics was finished. Some said he might try to start over in another state once he got out. Others believed he'd disappear altogether. As for me, I planned to do none of those things. I would remain, rooted, present, clear. Miranda wanted me to write a book. She said the world needed to hear the truth from women who never asked for revenge, but delivered justice anyway. I wasn't sure. Maybe someday. Right now, I preferred the feel of soil in my hands over the click of a keyboard. The final letter came a month later. It was from a local non-profit that Miranda secretly funded in my name. They had set up a new program for elderly women experiencing financial abuse or displacement by family. The brochure called it the Pierce Initiative. I laughed. Then I cried. That was the last page of the story I had lived. Not the betrayal, not the courtroom, but the seed planted for someone else to rise. Because sometimes survival isn't loud. It isn't a fist pounding a table or a headline splashed across news. Sometimes it's a woman walking through her front door, putting the kettle on and choosing to sleep well in a house no one can take from her again. That's what I did. And that, finally, was enough. If you've ever felt like someone took your kindness for weakness or tried to erase your worth, I hope this story reminded you of what still belongs to you: your strength, your voice, and your peace. Thank you for being here. If any part of this story stayed with you, let me know. I'm listening.